sponsored by HealthNet, will take place at the Spar Heights Community Center on Wednesday, July 15th from 10:15 to 11:15 a.m. This is a good opportunity for those new to the Medicare system or who would like more information about their coverage. Call Savag at 818-548-3373 if you would like more details. And on Wednesday night, music lovers can enjoy Cuban salsa, performed by Orquesta Charangoa during the Parks Department Summer Concert Series at the north end of Verdugo Park. The free concert runs from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. Parking is also free. Bring a picnic dinner, folding chairs, or blankets for seating. The popular Movies in the Park series continues on Friday, July 17th, with a showing of Hook at Pacific Park, 501 South Pacific. Seating is on the lawn. Beach chairs or blankets are suggested. Recreation staff will be on site prior to the start of the movie to provide a variety of games and activities. Admission is free. Call John at 818-548-3785 if more information is necessary. Saturday, July 18th is Glendale's popular cruise night, returning to Brand Boulevard for the 16th year. Bring your family and enjoy an evening of classic cars and hot rods, community displays, and live entertainment, including headliners Sha Na Na, along with the Jan and Dean Show featuring Dean Torrance, the Four Preps, and celebrity guest judge Pat Boone. This free family event begins at 5:30 p.m. along Brand Boulevard, in the heart of downtown Glendale. Restaurants and stores will be open for business during cruise night. If you need more information, call the city's hotline at 818-548-6464. And if you want to register your car to display in this premier car show, visit the Customer Services Office in the Civic Auditorium, 1401 North Verdugo Road. Neighborhood Services and the Committee for a Clean and Beautiful Glendale invite local businesses to be a part of a summer night on the plaza on July 31st. If your restaurant would like to participate, or if you have items, gift certificates, or other services you would like to donate for the silent auction, proceeds from the event will benefit community beautification and school education programs. Photographers, do you want to win $250 for your skill and creativity? Then grab your camera and take a picture of what you like best about your community. Then enter the My Hometown Photo Contest. An 8x10 color or black and white photo may be mailed or hand-delivered to Neighborhood Services, 141 North Glendale Avenue, Suite 114. The deadline for entries is Tuesday, July 28th. Entries will be exhibited at the Summer Night on the Plaza event on July 31st. Contest rules may be viewed at the following web address. Finally, the Adult Recreation Center, 201 East Colorado, is now open during weekend hours so that seniors and frail adults can escape the heat. The center's weekend hours are Saturday from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., with lunch being served at 11:30 a.m., and on Sunday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m., with lunch being served at noon. There is a suggested $2.50 donation for lunch for adults 60 years of age and older. Reservations are required and can be made by calling 818-548-3775. That's it for this time. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again next week.
afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of Glendale, also to our audiences in the room. I would like to welcome you to the televised schedule of July 15, 2009 meeting of the Building and Safety and Fire Appeals Board. The first item on the agenda is the roll call vote, those in attendance, which will be done by our Secretary, Ms. Celestia Luna.
Thank you. Board Member John Tatulian.
Present.
Board Member Alexander Wu.
Present.
Board Member Harmek Abkarian.
Present.
Chairman Bahman Ehsan.
Present.
Next item, whenever you're ready.
Pardon me?
Ready for the next item?
Yes,
Okay.
please.
Item number 2, presentations and commendations. Today we have none.
Item number 3.
Oral communications. We do have requests to speak, and I'd like to clarify if any of these are other than for the item number 6, new business, case number BMOD 2009-0130. Okay, we will hold on to these until the presentation on item number 6.
Okay, item number 4.
Approval of minutes of previous meeting dated April 15th, 2009.
Chairman Ehsan, members of the board, you all should have received in your packet a copy of the minutes from the April 15, 2009 meeting. I hope you had a chance to review them. Ms. Luna and I did take an opportunity to look at them to ensure the accuracy, but nonetheless, there may be something that we missed, and if there are any corrections or comments, we're welcome to receive them right now. Otherwise, if upon your review they seem satisfactory, now would be an appropriate time for a motion and second for approval.
Approval is a motion.
I'd like to second the motion.
So approved.
Let's go ahead and take the roll call, Celeste.
Okay.
Board Member John Tatulian.
Yes.
Board Member Alexander Wu.
Aye.
Board Member Harmek Abkarian.
Yes.
Chairman Bahman Ehsan.
Yes, it's approved.
And next, item 5, old business. Today we have none. Next, item 6, new business. And this goes into case number BMOD 2009-0130 regarding 207 Good Avenue and 127 Burchett Street. Subtopic A, request for an exemption from the 8-foot 2-inch minimum required vertical clearance within an existing parking structure, which will serve a new high-rise office building. Subtopic B, request to allow the rearrangement of existing legal, non-conforming disabled accessible parking spaces within an existing parking structure.
Chairman Ehsan, members of the board, at item number 6, we have the new business for the day. We have only one case that is before you for a public hearing. This one is a little bit different than other public hearings that have been entertained by this board in recent times because this is what is referred to as a ratification hearing. The primary difference between this hearing and typical hearings that are brought before this board is that rather than developing some type of resolution on your own, this is a case for which I've already taken an action. Under state law for disabled access appeals, if it turns out that somebody is seeking a waiver of those appeals, to ensure that no one individual can take that action and possibly take a bad action, something that might deprive the disabled community from the access that they are entitled to within a building or any occupied use or structure for that matter, all waivers of disabled access requirements are required to be ratified by a duly appointed board such as this. So at the end of this hearing, and I will give a brief introduction to why we're here, what action I took, what I will then do is I'll turn it over to the applicants and let them discuss what they have done in order to meet the spirit and the intent of the code. If after all of that discussion you feel fit to ratify the action that I've taken, then what we will do is we'll go for a motion and a second for such ratification, and we'll take a roll call for it. If, in contrast, you feel that a ratification is not appropriate, then what you would do is make a motion to not ratify the hearing, and in both cases, you'll give the reasons therefore, and we would take a roll call vote for that. Okay, that being said, let's jump right into it. You'll notice that there are two addresses for this particular matter before you, and you'll also notice that there are really two subtopics that are here. The two addresses are 207 Good Avenue and 127 Burchett Street. The two subtopics are essentially a request of a waiver of the minimum 8-foot 2-inch clearance for a parking structure, and subtopic B is for an approval to rearrange parking spaces within an existing parking structure. It turns out that the reason that there is a second matter here, subtopic B, is that the solution or the resolution to meet the spirit and the intent of the code under item number A actually involved reconfiguration of all of the disabled access parking stalls within an existing building to not only improve the disabled access to those parking spaces for the 11 required parking spaces for this project, but in the process improve what was actually legally non-conforming disabled access parking stalls within the building that served 3 other buildings as well. So it resulted in a wholesale improvement of the accessibility to these parking spaces. Getting back to the addresses, the reason that there are two addresses is that the parking structure that we are about to discuss is actually located at 127 Burchett Street. That is a multi-story parking structure that was originally permitted in 1979, if my memory serves me correctly, and construction was completed in the early 80s. That parking structure serves a number of adjoining parcels, including the parcel that is at the heart of this particular matter, which is a brand new multi-story Type 1 office building located at 207 Good Avenue. That particular structure, as a new structure, was required to have a number of parking spaces associated with it. Those parking spaces, by agreement with the Glendale Redevelopment Agency, were intended and are indeed provided in the parking structure that I just referred to. It's my understanding that there are several hundred parking spaces within that parking structure which are allocated to the 207 Good project, of which, due to the ratio of required disabled access parking spaces required under California state law, 11 of them would be required to be accessible to the physically disabled.
Sir Tom, who owns the building?
The building is owned by McGuire Partners.
No, the parking structure.
Also McGuire Partners.
Oh, okay.
I lost my train of thought. During the approval process for the project at 207 Good, during plan check, it was identified that accessible parking would be required, and a condition was imposed that the certificate of occupancy would not be issued until such time as the disabled access parking matter was resolved. That matter was placed as a condition, and it exists to this day for the certificate of occupancy. So therefore, despite the fact that for people who have been watching the project, it appears as if it has been completed. In fact, it has recently received all of the final inspection approvals, including final fire alarm, landscaping, everything has been completed. But the certificate of occupancy has been withheld as a result of that condition. The sole reason that we have not been able to release that one condition is that the disabled accessible parking spaces designated within the parking structure were found to be non-compliant because when that building was built, that building was not built with sufficient headroom to meet today's disabled access standards. Clearly, in the early 80s, there's no way that they could have known when they built that structure that subsequently the disabled access regulations would change, thereby requiring 8 feet 2 inch clearance to all of the accessible stalls. In an attempt to meet the spirit and the intent of the code, what the applicants have done is they have agreed to provide additional accessible spaces above and beyond the 11 that would be required by code. What they have proposed to do is to provide 2 additional stalls, bringing their total disabled access count from 11 to 13. That is in addition to the accessible stalls that are also provided in that building, serving the other structures that are served by that common parking structure. But of the 11 accessible stalls that are required for the 207 Good project, they have voluntarily increased that number to 13. The reason that they have done that is for a very good reason. Because they are unable to achieve the 8 foot 2 inch clearance for that building, I met with the applicants to find out what can be done to come as close as possible to meeting the spirit and the intent of Chapter 11 of the Building Code. Turns out that there are 2 spaces that were not adequately being utilized for accessible parking that are completely compliant. Those stalls comply with the disabled access regulations in California in every way. In terms of clear ceiling height, they do have at least 8 feet 2. In terms of cross slope, they either did or they will be made to comply with a maximum cross slope of 2%. If that means floating the slab, grinding the slab, whatever it takes, they have agreed to do that. In terms of location, they are located on the ground floor, so they are the most readily accessible to disabled individuals. In terms of path of travel, they can be configured so that the individuals that use those stalls do not have to wheel behind any other vehicle other than their own. In other words, these 2 stalls can be made to comply with all of the requirements under California's Title 24 Disabled Access Regulations. What's very important to keep in mind is that pursuant to federal law, ADA standards, of the 11 parking spaces that they are required to provide, only 2 would be required to be fully van accessible with the full 8 foot 2 inch clearance. So by coming up with these 2 additional stalls, they can actually meet the ADA federal guideline. It just so happens that in California, where very recently the codes have been changed to require the 8 foot 2 inch clearance to all the stalls, that's where they run into a problem. Up until recently, in fact, California had the same standard as the federal guidelines, which required the 8 foot 2 inch clearance only to, in this case, 2 stalls. In California, that requirement has changed. It is believed, and I happen to believe this, for the primary reason that without adequate control, if 11 stalls are required, of which 2 need to be provided with 8 foot 2 inch clearance, without adequate control, it is very conceivable that somebody who is entitled to use an accessible stall might park in a stall with additional headroom clearance, regardless of whether or not they were driving a high-profile van, thereby utilizing that very, very valuable resource before it was really necessary. And then, if in this particular instance, those 2 spaces were used early, if somebody later on came with a high-profile van, there'd be somebody parked in those spaces, thereby rendering the additional 8 foot 2 inch clearance ineffective for their particular needs. The reason that this particular proposal included adding 2 additional stalls was in part to meet the federal ADA guideline, but then in addition to that, if adequate steps could be taken to overcome the recognized problem that California has seen, that individuals that may not need to rely upon a taller stall might still take advantage of them. If something could be done to overcome that particular problem so that people in low-profile disabled vehicles could park in those particular stalls, leaving the two taller stalls open until such time arose as somebody with a tall vehicle needed it, then it would meet the spirit and the intent of the code. By virtue of reworking all of the disabled stalls, the applicants were able to present to me a proposal in which they increased their 11 stalls to 13 in a manner in which they would provide additional signage, which has to be submitted to my satisfaction. It couldn't just be some modest signage at their choosing. You would have to have sufficient durability, sufficient visibility, sufficient requirements or text or copy that would satisfy me that those spaces would very clearly be reserved for people who really needed it, but with additional directional signage throughout the parking structure, anybody else that needed access to accessible parking but perhaps would not need a full 8 feet 2 inches would be redirected to one of the many, many other disabled parking spaces in the structure. I felt that this met the spirit and the intent of the code, and recognizing that this parking structure was built in the early 80s, and it is just not reasonable to expect them to lift the building up to accomplish the 8 feet 2 that would be required for a new building or a new parking structure. I saw fit to approve their modified proposal. The proposal that was given to me, which is basically what is in your packet, is a complete redesign from what was last submitted to Plan Check, at which time a problem was identified. With that, there are some exhibits that the consultants have brought. I would be more than happy to answer any specific questions you might have of me, of staff, or probably more appropriately, I'm prepared to turn this over to the consultant to run through exactly what they have done, because while I've explained in theory what they've done to accomplish it, the consultants are prepared to show you the location of the parking structure, the proximity to the entrance, to elevators of where the two fully accessible stalls are. They are prepared to show you where not just 11 but all 13 parking spaces are shown. I believe that they have some photographs to show the degree of accessibility even for the non-8 foot 2 inch stalls. And if it pleases the board, I would be prepared to turn that over to the applicant to further present the case.
Mr. Tom, I think it's a very good idea to hear everybody first, to get all the information, pertinent information. Then I think the member of the board, including myself, can pose any question that we have, and it may arise due to this new information that we are going to get.
Very well. Mr. Chairman, with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Luna to call the first speaker card, and I believe that the order that has been selected is to have the parking consultant, Mr. Banks, present the case. You do have copies of everything you will see in front of you, but if you would like, I can draw your attention to the visual display. I'm going to hand Mr. Banks a laser pointer if you would like to use it, and if you would like me to advance through the slides, just let me know. And so if you could stand up there at the podium. And if you could start, please, by introducing yourself.
Yes, my name is Wayne Banks. I'm the president of Parkitex. It's a parking consulting firm that I've had for 30 years, and we're architects and we're also parking specialists. I'm here today representing McGuire Properties. They're the owners of the new building at 207 Good. They are also the owners of the parking structure that we're dealing with at this point. And they also own the 3 other office buildings that surround the parking structure. We've identified 2 hotels also on the same block, but that's not part of their ownership. With that, I'd like to thank the chairman and the board for hearing our case today. And what I'd like to do, I think, Mr. Tom has gone through and very adequately represented and portrayed to you what we have been working with his staff and with him on as a solution to this. So what I'd like to do is, I'll go rather quickly through the slides. I can go, faster or slower, depending. I don't want to drag this into a 5-hour presentation because I don't think we need to do that. So with that said, if everybody can hear me, the parking structure which exists is in the center of the site. Excuse me. The building that was recently constructed is 207 Good Avenue in this location. The other 3 buildings, which are owned by McGuire, are 801 North Brand, 701 North Brand, and 700 North Central Avenue. Stuart, we can go to the next one. The issue in the original parking structure, as Stuart mentioned, we're dealing with one issue here, and that's really providing accessible parking for 207 Good Avenue. That accessible parking is being located within the existing parking structure. So we have, in this exercise, provided the majority of the parking as being compliant with the exception that we've asked for of the waiver of the 8'2" clearance. We've chosen also to really relook at all the handicap parking or accessible parking within the structure and make it as code compliant as we can. The issues that we had originally in the structure, you'll see some areas that, like this location, that indicates an accessible stall. There were 2 stalls here that were accessible. If they're not highlighted now in this color, they don't exist in our proposed new striping plan. The issues that were within the structure originally were headroom, number 1. Number 2, the previous architect that did the striping layout placed a number of stalls in these areas here. These areas essentially are on cross slopes that, in our field verification, probably run from 4.5% to maybe 5.5%. They are nowhere near the minimal 2% slope that's actually required for a parking space for accessibility. So one of our goals was to try and resolve that issue by relocating things. The headroom within the structure, what we found was the lower area here as we enter, you can follow this little blue dotted line would be a path of vehicular access, if you will, for 8'2" vehicles. We're able to come in and park to the right here, and I have a photograph of this later, which provides one van accessible stall meeting all of the requirements of path of travel, cross slope, and headroom. We can continue up and make a left-hand turn. We can provide 8'2" clearance here, a proper accessible path of travel, and by losing a couple of parking places, we can rework the slab configuration in this to get to a 2% minimum and maintain a proper path of travel out to the core. The building in question, the 207 Good Avenue, is in this location.
What's the slope in that entry, sir?
The slope here?
Right, when you enter the parking structure to access the, yeah.
Where we enter here, it varies. It comes in, I'm going to say, 3-4% with the vehicle, and then it levels out as you get to this area. And from here to here is all within this 2% range. There are some areas that are perhaps 2.2, a little bit over, and so what we're proposing in those areas is we're able to either float the slab a little bit to reduce the percentage, or we can actually grind off a little bit of the concrete. This is on a slab on grade, and we can lower it so that we can maintain everywhere that we've provided this accessible parking something less than a 2% slope. The vehicle itself, as it drives in and drives through this area, which here it's definitely greater than, it's back in that 4.5%, and as it exits and comes back out again, this is a driving surface. This does not require the minimum 2%. It can be, in the new codes, actually up to 6.8%, but it right now falls basically around the 5% range, which is code compliant, if that answers your question.
Yeah, go ahead, sir.
Okay. The other,
I'll wait till the end.
symbol we've used here is this yellow ochre color, if you will. This area is compliant in terms of cross slope and path of travel, but has a headroom less than 8'2". So on the ground floor, what we've done is we've provided the two that have the van access full compliancy, and we have one additional one that basically complies with everything except for headroom. In terms of the specific building, only 2 van accessible stalls are required. The 510 parking places, we only need 2 van accessible. So what we're providing for the new building is fully compliant. We could go to the next slide. And why don't we just skip one more, Steve? This goes to the second level. Again, you can see that there were some parking, accessible parking out in this area, again, on those slopes. So what we have done, excuse me, is on the second, third, and fourth levels, we've actually provided all the accessible parking in proximity to the 207 Good building. We've created a new path of travel that's fully compliant that goes to the lobbies and does the same thing here. So location, percentage of slope, this area across the front here is actually within that 2% range. It's off of all the ramping in the building, so it's fully compliant. So what we are missing in the equation here is the 8'2" clear. This is a picture of a 6-foot van that we parked in a stall here. This stall that's here is actually compliant at the moment. However, the ones adjacent to it it doesn't have the required no parking on it. So we're actually restriping everything here to provide a path of travel actually along the exterior face of the building as opposed to down the drive aisles. It's a much safer condition. This would be the same thing on the third floor. Again, everything clustered on the good side of the building. Same on level 4. And then level 5, we're dropping down. We're just providing 2 stalls now, these 2 here, relocating everything. And then the same thing on the roof. Again, everything accessible to the main lobby, which goes down and has direct access to the new building. If we go to the next one, to substantiate some of what we're talking about, and as Mr. Tom mentioned, in ADA guidelines, the majority of the accessible parking can fall within a 7-foot height limitation. Only the vans are required to be the 8'2". California, we've generalized things, and everything has to have the 8'2". So there are some vans that exist on the market that are van conversions and so forth that have an overall height. This one is a Ford van that's been converted with a drop floor and so on. And its overall height, depending on how they configure the floor, is either 84 inches, which is 7 feet, or 88 inches, which would actually be 7'4". And this is a customized van, and for years they've been quite common. More recently, the conversion specialists, all of the vehicle types, with the exception probably of Hummer and some of the bigger vehicles, have tended to get a little bit smaller. So with that, the people that provide these vans have actually been making the modifications based on current types of vehicles, and what they're using are things like the Toyota Sienna, the Kia, Chrysler Town and Country, Ford, Hyundai, a number of them. And all of these vehicles are really in the 69-inch, so they're actually under 7 feet in height. And there's some other ones on the market as well, and the Ford Explorer, the Chevy Express, and the GM Savannah are also used. They're falling, in that 82 range, so they're still under 7 feet in overall height. So the trend today is to much lower vehicles. If we go to the next one. This goes back to the ground level, and inserted a couple photographs of our van. You can see the amount of headroom again that's here. But basically, this is what we're looking at in the open corner. We would be coming across with a path of travel. This one, we need to float the slab a little bit in here, and we're going to come across with a less than 2% slope. And then this one, because of some piping and actually the fact that that entrance does not have the overall height that the other entrance does, this one is 7'2". And I guess we did talk about trying to, in essence, restrict the overall 8'2" stalls so that they would be available for vans that actually have extra height. So we've proposed two signs, this one and this one. This one really is stating that there is 7-foot high accessible parking for vans on other levels. This one, what we're proposing is put that at each of these two stalls, asking and stating that this space is really restricted for use only with vehicles that exceed 7 feet. Technically speaking, anybody who has an accessible placard can park in any accessible stall. We're simply asking that they respect the fact that if you're in a car, you don't need 8'2". Perhaps you could go to another level. So we're proposing to work with staff and develop, this is our proposed signage text. We would propose to work with them again, make sure this is adequate for them, and build these signs in a permanent manner and, in keeping with the rest of the signage on the project. We then go to the next. So the reason that we're here today is to really ask for an exemption from the 8'2" minimum. And the other thing that's developed out of this is we're actually also asking for permission to relocate all the existing previously approved accessible parking to a location that we feel is more conducive and is fully code compliant. Again, as argument on our behalf to support what we've done, the existing parking structure was built in 1980. To modify it is technically infeasible. It would almost mean demolishing it and building a new parking structure. None of the existing stalls in the structure were code compliant, and what we've done in our proposal is really enhanced and improved not only all the accessible parking for Good Avenue building, but also for all of the other three buildings on the site. We've developed a striping solution which, in essence, makes the path of travel compliant for all of the parking, makes the percentage of slope compliant with all of the parking, makes the location of the stalls closest to the nearest primary entrance, and we're developing, as I just mentioned previously, the restrictive signage. To also back it up, as Tom mentioned, we've provided 2 more accessible parking stalls specifically for Good Building, 207 Good. In essence, we've actually provided 5 more accessible stalls in our striping solution, which benefits all of the 4 buildings. So we've gone beyond the overall required for the 16 some odd stalls that are in the structure. The other thing that we've done in terms of the total parking structure, if we use the van requirement for right now, it's just under 1,600 stalls. We would require 4 van accessible stalls. We're providing a total of 9 at this point, 2 fully compliant, 7 with the 7-foot headroom. And in essence, we believe that we've done everything we can, given the existing structure, to make all the parking for the 207 Good Building fully compliant. And then for the project as a whole, it benefits every project that's been built on this block. So I guess in conclusion, the chief building official has basically made a determination and has expressed a desire to grant us our request for a waiver from the requirement of 8'2" and the location. And what we're here to do today is ask you and urge you if you would ratify his decision. So with that, I can turn it over to any questions you might have.
Yes, I think this time it'll be a good idea to give the commissioner a chance to ask question, because you had quite a bit of pictorial representation,
Certainly.
presentation here. We'll start from you. Do you have any question?
At this time, I don't. I appreciate your presentation.
What about you, sir?
Same here. I don't have any
I
questions.
have
at this
some
time.
question. Is there any way you can go back to that blue line, that picture that you have, but the one that showed the parking, the whole parking layout with that section
Yeah,
colored
slide
in
number
blue?
1,
Yeah.
probably. Number 2, I'm sorry. This one.
No, okay, now, would you, could you turn the lights off, please? Would you show me, when a car comes in, when a van comes in from the street, show me the path of travel?
Yes.
How he goes in and where does he park exactly?
If I
and-
may, well, let me try with the pointer. If not, I'll walk up to the
Okay.
slide. Perhaps you can hear me anyway. Let me walk up a little bit.
Yeah, if you can just talk a little louder, I'm sure we can hear. You have a stick here if
Have
you
a
want
stick.
to.
We're dealing here. I think I'd be okay.
Yeah, let's just use the stick.
Been offered. Thank you. There are 3 accesses to the parking structure. There's one here.
Well, you can't get in from there.
You can drive a vehicle here.
No, I'm talking about the handicap access. I thought you have a sign up there that you can't.
There's all handicap vehicles, I'm sorry, go backwards. The 8'2" handicap.
That's the one I'm
is
talking
what
about.
we're
Yeah.
talking about right
That's
now.
right.
Only enter in this location.
That's what I was thinking about. Okay.
So as you drive in,
Mm-hmm.
you basically can come in here.
Okay.
8'2" clear as you follow this dotted line.
Okay.
You get to generally the lobby area here.
Mm-hmm.
There's a ramp access here. Second ramp access as you come in. When you go beyond this point,
Mm-hmm.
the 8'2" headroom starts to drop off.
Okay.
It reduces to somewhere under the beams, about 7' to 7'1".
Okay.
As you make a left-hand turn here, going up this ramp,
Mm-hmm.
you can maintain 8'2" clear this area here.
Okay.
And then as you come back across here, you can maintain 8'2". As you circulate and come back out, this is all 8'2" accessible.
And all those parkings on the right-hand side are 8'2", right-hand side of the path? Or
Here.
no, the path.
Yeah.
Yeah.
These are all 8'2".
Mm-hmm.
You have complete, actually, 8'2" clearance in the main lobby area all the way through here.
Oh, those are all 8'2"?
Well, there's no parking here. This is all
Oh.
lobby.
Oh, those are all lobby. Okay. So where is the park, exactly the park?
Parking is here,
Okay.
one here, one here. These are the two 8'2".
So I thought the blue color indicates all parking, but that's
sorry,
not.
no, this was kind of everything related to fully compliant path of travel and everything. Because actually, the code also says block at 8'2".
Okay. So you come in and now what would happen if some van comes in and by mistake drive straight rather than making a left there?
Part of what we provide as a solution to that is we call them, they're actually height limitation signs.
Mm-hmm.
So we would be providing a sign here, and what it traditionally is, it's made in a number of manners, but it could be, for example, a 6-inch plastic tube, and it has markings on it, displays accessible placard on it, and it will have a statement that says 8'2" clear minimum.
Mm-hmm.
They'll have that located at this location. Now, as you go into the structure, there will be another one mounted basically here. This one will say minimum clearance 7'0". So what it will do, and it will be hung so the bottom of that tube that 7'0". So if you are in a van that's at 6'6", it would technically will tap the top of your vehicle. So we would provide that here. Now, in this location, as you come in, this one will have a height restriction sign of 7'0". So anything that if you came in a large van of that 7'0" requirement, you would not be able to physically structure here again without tapping that height limitation. This is used in all of the parking structures that we typically what happens in many jurisdictions, try to consolidate all the accessible parking on the ground level. Cost. So we usually provide those limitation signs where you start to go up a ramp to another level. We have a zone client, so we need to isolate that zone.
You mentioned in your statement that you have that there was a lot of non-compliance, code compliance in that parking structure, and you brought it up to code. Could you give me an example? What non-compliance did you have in that parking stall?
Yes.
And did you lose any parking stall by doing that?
Yes, we did. Yes to both counts.
Excuse me, Mr. Banks, can you stand near the microphone? Because while we can hear you, people
The rest can't.
in the television world can't hear you.
The major two issues, and there was a previous waiver approved back in around 1994 for the existing striping plan, and that waiver from the code essentially granted two things. It granted relief from the 8'2" vertical clearance requirement. It also granted exemption from a path of travel. And one thing it didn't address was cross slope, and I don't know, I think perhaps nobody noticed at the time that they were parked on areas that were over 5% or over 2%, I'm sorry. So if we look at what's on this particular slide right now, there were 1, 2, 3 accessible stalls parked in this location on that previous striping plan. There is not 8'2" headroom requirement here, or clearance here. There is here, but you have 2 parking stalls that were there originally. The car on the right, or the vehicle on the right, was allowed to exit into a common loading zone and walk across the drive aisle, so his path of travel was code compliant. It was on a slope greater than 2% that made it not compliant. The vehicle to the left, it exited onto that same loading zone and then walked over to the main lobby. By code, this individual is not permitted by code to walk behind another vehicle. And the argument there is if he is disabled and he doesn't notice that somebody's in the other vehicle and that vehicle backs out, he's in a wheelchair, you potentially have an injury. So the current codes make it very clear that you are not allowed to walk behind another accessible vehicle. So everywhere we had this situation, we basically resolved it by making the path of travel exclusive.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, if I may interject here, one of the questions that was raised when we were trying to come up with a solution was recognizing that along that blue dotted path that you are referring to, that we had a lot of additional parking stalls which could afford the additional 8'2" headroom. A question was also raised regarding the total number of parking spaces in the structure to see if there was a surplus, which indeed there is a huge surplus of additional parking spaces, because if necessary, we could lose a small number of the regular parking stalls in order to make larger disabled stalls in that area. What was pointed out, and I did give consideration to this, was that to some degree, there are different types of code nonconformities that existed before and that will exist even under this scenario. There is no way short of rebuilding the entire building to make everything comply. And it was the consultant and the applicant who suggested to me, and they did convince me, that out of all of the code nonconformities, to have additional 8-foot 2-inch high accessible stalls and expect those individuals to potentially walk or wheel behind somebody else's car presented a much, much more hazardous condition. And after some consideration, I agreed with them that I would prefer to meet the spirit and the intent of the code by coming up with some means of reserving what limited other 8-foot 2-inch stalls were available, rather than having them park in an area and expect them to walk or wheel behind somebody else's car. I think we've all seen individuals, whether you're wheelchair bound or not, that might be rather slow. And if you're walking behind another vehicle and you can't get out of the way, even when you see those reverse lights turn on, if they don't see you, to expect a disabled individual to walk or wheel behind another vehicle is potentially very hazardous, which is why over the years, the disabled access regs have, as Mr. Banks has pointed out, changed the regulations so that they are not permitted to be expected to walk or wheel behind another vehicle. I think that that one change alone has dramatically improved the disabled layout within the structure. And when Mr. Bank indicates that they have restructured all of their disabled stalls, I think that to some degree that strategy to reduce the number of times, if at all, in fact I'll leave this up to Mr. Banks because I don't know whether or not any stalls any further have to wheel behind somebody else's car. I think that that's something that they had in mind when they redid this.
Yeah, that's true, Mr. Dunn. The reason I brought this question up, Mr. Bank in his statement said that the parking structure was brought up to code. I just wanted to know, it was the whole parking structure that was brought up to code, or it was just the handicapped stalls that were brought up to code?
I apologize. It is the accessible parking.
Okay, that's what I wanted to make clear.
I apologize.
Okay.
The other, I'd just like to add to what Mr. Tom said. We did explore, and we worked with staff on this for quite a while, the possibility of potentially parking additional accessible stalls in this zone here, which is sort of an 8-foot 2 zone.
Mm-hmm.
In order to do that, we would have to, we could comply with the 8-foot 2 requirement. We could not comply with a path of travel requirement, and we could not comply with a cross slope requirement, because we're able to float and manipulate the concrete in this area because we're against a shear wall, and we have a localized area that we can blend things into the slab. Once you get beyond here, you're back into this 5% slope, and it's not a possibility technically to rework that slab. And so what we felt was the most beneficial was make two of these absolutely compliant in every regard. And then this face of the building generally is at a 2% or a little less in terms of slope from this end to this end on all of the upper levels. There are a few areas where it's a little bumpy and so on, where it might exceed that 2%, and we're going to tweak the slab to get it back into that range. So by parking, and maybe, Mr. Tom, if you could go to like slide number 3, this one's fine. You can see that what we've done, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 accessible cars here, or vehicles there, and 4 on this side. Path of travel is right along the outside edge going directly to the lobby. It again comes up this and goes directly to the lobby, so nobody has to walk behind anybody's car. All of this percentage slope is 2% or less, and the issue goes back to the nature of our appeal and the ratification of the building official's decision on the 8'2" reduction in height. That's all we can't physically comply with in this location.
I can't see it from here. What's your backup distance?
Backup distance?
At the where you're going to park the...
It exceeds 24 feet.
I can't see it from here. You have a dimension there, but I can't see it. Yeah. 26 foot
If you
clear?
bear with me,
Maybe we can zoom. Angela, do you remember offhand?
Yes, it's 4 feet clear from the face of the column and approximately 20
Here we go.
feet to the shore line. Back up.
Isn't it supposed to be 25 feet, Mr.? Tom?
the backup dimension would be predicated by our zoning parking standards. If this, to tell you the truth, I don't know.
I believe it's 24.
I would have to check with
Pretty sure it's 24.
I think they should.
Okay.
So we exceed that in most locations, and we do have a column that comes down in the drive aisle that would reduce the drive aisle width to 24 feet. In essence, it's about 26.
I don't have any more questions. Do you have any more questions? Sir?
Oh, I don't have any questions. Actually, I visited the parking structure last week after I received this package, and I'm quite happy with the technical side of this parking structure. Just have a concern which is not technical, and is that if we approve this, will this open the city of Glendale to litigation? Or doesn't matter?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, the answer to that is no. The state of California does have a provision by which, in cases like this, and in fact it's intended to address what is referred to as equivalent facilitation. The key here that you guys, that you board members need to evaluate is whether or not you believe that this approach effectively meets the spirit and the intent of the code. The code is intended to afford disabled individuals with a reasonably barrier-free environment so that they can function just as you or I can, so that they have the same access and opportunities that a non-disabled person has. Why the state of California has a different standard than the rest of the country, I did my best at explaining it. And I think that the state of California really has gone one step further than the rest of the country in recognizing that some people are not necessarily considerate of others, and just because you are entitled to utilize a disabled stall doesn't mean that you should take one that you don't necessarily need. If there's an individual that is visually impaired but doesn't need any special walking or travel assistance, and they drive a typical vehicle like you or I do, or if they're audibly impaired, if they don't need to take an 8-foot 2-inch high stall, then they should be directed to another stall. I think that the proposal that the applicants have given to myself and my staff does achieve that by providing for the 207 Good project 2 more stalls than is necessary so that they can set those aside, so to speak. Those will be above and beyond reserved for tall profile vehicles. What is very, very interesting is something that Mr. Banks alluded to, which I did not offer up in my presentation because I'm focused only on the 207 Good Avenue project. I believe Mr. Banks indicated that in order to address this, there were more than 2 additional disabled access stalls provided. I believe he said that there are 5.
There are 5 additional ones within the overall parking.
So when you consider the legally required number of accessible stalls for all 4 buildings, they are providing, to the extent they can within an existing building that was built within 1980, all of those stalls and 5 more to boot. That really does make the opportunity for disabled individuals to find the stall that is most appropriate for them. I think the key to all of this is something that is not required by the code. It's something that I have imposed as a condition for me to take the action that I did, which is signage, which will alert individuals that there are a lot of accessible stalls in this building. Please use anyone other than these 2 unless you really need them. One thing that while it doesn't really apply to this project, because we're really only looking at 11 required but 13 provided stalls, it might be interesting to know, and I don't want to put you on the spot. Perhaps Mr. Banks or Mr. Goodwin knows. How many disabled stalls are there in the entire building? I think that based on the parking count, there would probably be quite a few.
I can answer that. We basically have, with the restriping, and we have taken some stalls out of the original striping plan, there are 1,594 overall parking places. That requires a total of 26 accessible stalls, and we're providing 31 accessible stalls. The requirement for van parking for the total structure would be 4, and we're providing 9.
What was that number again, Mr. Bank? 1594?
Yes, 1,594 total parking places, including the accessible
So
stalls.
write-up says 1,629. I don't know.
That was originally. If you go through the rest of my write-up, it gets less.
It's on this presentation here.
Yeah. I think you'll find further in the arguments where we start talking about how we addressed it. The original structure that had the non-conforming that was granted the previous waiver was 1629.
So, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, as you can see, this was not an easy action to take. A lot of thought went into it and a lot of effort to come up ultimately with something that I felt met the spirit and the intent of the code. So while this is a roundabout fashion, Board Member Abkarian, you asked, does this expose the city to any potential lawsuits or liability? First and foremost, the answer is no, that the code does allow for these means by which we can consider alternative methods of compliance, and that's actually why we are here. While I feel very, very comfortable with the action that I took, under state law, recognizing that nobody is perfect, and I make mistakes just like everybody else. For something as important as this is one of the very, very rare types of actions that requires a ratification. So that's why we're here before you, to see if at least the majority of you feel that the action that I took is appropriate. And then secondarily, does the city subject itself to liability? The answer is no. Under California state law, we are not liable for any such actions or decisions like this. The property owner ultimately is responsible for everything that is done on his or her property.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I
Next,
appreciate it.
please.
Well, with that, we actually need a motion and a second and a roll call
I do have
for this
two
particular
questions,
case.
if I may. Upon entry, I see there's going to be a parking space right to the right as you enter.
Correct.
And then, now, is there going to be a dedicated walkway or highlighted walkway for...
There is a designated walkway from the, I guess, could we go back to the second slide?
Because I do see some arrows, so it's...
Let's see, where was I? Hit the page. And the second slide?
Yes, please.
This one?
Yes, that'll work, I think. The car is, or the van is parked here. The loading zone is to the right of it, which is what's required by code. And then you come and walk up this path behind your own vehicle, which is permitted, and go into the lobby here. One of the things that's a detail that's in some of the rest of the package is what we have done, since this is walking on the edge of an area that is the designated drive aisle. We're providing a series of delineators, plastic red sticks, I call them. They're delineators that demarcate the edge of that zone.
Okay.
And so that is a visual protection, if you will.
Okay. And one last question I have is, once you try to get to the second parking spot, as you're turning the corner, what's the level of visibility for the driver as they're driving in to see that there's either somebody in a wheelchair or someone walking? Is it highly visible so they will be able to take course of action in the...
Yes, there is. If we could go, it's third from the last slide, I think.
This one?
And I apologize, this doesn't quite show it, but this is that area. It's very, very open, well-lit, and as you're making the turn, the distance between these two shear walls is probably something in the 28-foot range. And when you look, as you make that turn, you're basically looking directly into that one accessible stall. So I think it's quite safe.
So that would not have any delineation like you have for the other space?
No, because you have to walk
Exactly.
perpendicular to the drive aisle.
But the level of visibility should be enough for
Yeah.
anyone driving in.
I would say yes, and we don't always look on history, but there were 2 accessible stalls parked in this area since prior to 1994, and I don't believe we've had an issue to date, so.
Okay, thank you.
I thought there were other speakers. Is that the only?
it.
Oh, okay. I thought that's why I said next. I meant the next speaker.
Mr. Chairman, my fault. Mr. Goodwin, representing McGuire Partners, did turn in a speaker card in case he felt the urge to speak, but I think his consultant actually shared with you everything there is to hear about this. So with that, it's appropriate to hear any more comments from yourself or the board members, or if you see fit, to make a motion to ratify or to make a motion to not ratify.
Is there any other question? Mr. Tom, one question. Are we really allowed to make this decision? In other words, as far as the code, can a board really overrule the handicap access code?
Yes, the code, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, the code very clearly does address this. In fact, that's exactly why the code states that for instances where a code requirement required under Chapter 11 for disabled accessibility is waived, and in lieu of that, some other fashion of providing equivalent or alternate facilitation is offered in its stead, I, as the city's building official, or what's referred to as the authority having jurisdiction, may accept that, but if it is actually a waiver, as is in this particular case, that action needs to be ratified by a duly appointed board, which is why I'm bringing it before you. So the answer to that is, do you have the authority to do that? Absolutely you do.
Yes, thank you. So does any of you gentlemen want to entertain a motion? Either approve or disapprove?
I will entertain a motion to approve.
Actually, forgive me, the appropriate motion then would be a motion to ratify.
Ratify.
Motion, you entertain a motion for
Yes,
that?
I would like to entertain a motion to ratify the...
Just the building official's action.
The building official's action.
Anybody
I'll
second?
second.
Would you call the roll, please?
Board Member John Tatulian?
Yes.
Board Member Alexander Wu?
Yes.
Board Member Harmig Abkarian?
Yes.
Chairman Bahman Ehsan?
Yes. It's approved. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Item number 7, reports, information only. Stuart, building official Tom will take over from here.
Chairman Ehsan, members of the board, the last item on the agenda, item number 7, is our monthly report. Not a lot that I really want to draw to your attention on that particular report, other than the fact that we have been fairly busy, despite the fact that the economy has been suffering nationwide. The magnitude of some of our projects is certainly smaller than we had the same time last year, but of course, the same time last year, we were concluding a number of the projects associated with the Americana. at Brand. So those were very, very large-scale projects. I think that rather than going over the individual projects, what I'd like to do is draw your attention to the bottom line, so to speak, in some of the various categories. If you take a look at the last tab in your report, the tab labeled Monthly Building and Safety Report, on the first page you'll find our monthly income summary. What is very, very interesting, in fact, it really surprised me. I was waiting to see this, the report that would be presented this month, because this report, as you will note in the upper right-hand corner, closes out the month of June 2009. The reason that the report that closes out June 2009 is interesting is that we work on a fiscal year that begins July 1st. So this report tells us how we fared during the entire last fiscal year. Ordinarily, when I give my report, it's an incremental report, and you board members use that as a tool to judge where we are during the year. But this one actually shows where we closed out. And what's important is if you take a look about 1/4 of the way down the list, the row that is identified as subtotal, column A. That subtotal column A reflects the income that was taken in that is attributable solely to building permit fees and building plan check fees, and the related other trade permits that my department manages, including such things as electrical permits, plumbing and mechanical permits. But if you take a look at the column that is second to the right, current year to date, you will see that we brought in just a tad over $3 million just in terms of those building permit and plan check fees. If you compare that to the previous year to date, of course, since we had the Americana projects in there, that was that year was an anomaly. We had about $4.6 million in permit and plan check revenue that year.
Excuse me. Can you, just for refreshment of memory, the Americana timeline, when was the plan check fees generally received, and just so we have a frame of
Board
reference?
Member Tertullian, that's a very, very difficult question to answer because the project came in so many different phases. It started with what's referred to as grading and soil enhancement, which actually took place, the initial stages, more than 2 years ago.
Okay.
And then we had certain permits for some, but not all, of the key shell buildings coming in incrementally. And then even after that, which was technically the bulk of the work, wasn't for these large shell buildings, but for the individual tenant improvements for all of the retail, theater, and restaurant and residential tenants that we have there. All of those build-outs continued to come in phases or waves after that. So from the very beginning, the building department has been, right around then, has been very, very busy.
2006 to 2008 with a pretty level curve of...
I wouldn't say that it's level because at the very beginning, to get out of the ground, there was a tremendous amount of activity, and the valuations and the fees associated with the shell permits were very, very high. But even up through this year, through 2009, we've been having tenant improvement permits for some of the newer or most recent tenants. Okay?
Thank you.
So once again, while the previous year to date is an anomaly at $4.6 million, our current year-to-date totals for the fiscal year that we just closed was a tad over $3 million, which is very, very typical of what we've had in past years. So what this tells us is that while the economy has been slow, construction in Glendale has not stopped. People have merely changed what they've been doing. In many cases, rather than build an entirely new building, what they might be doing is one of these very, very substantial remodels, or maybe add a second story to an existing one-story building. And whereas a lot of people in past years were doing the upgrade sort of move where they would sell one home and move up to a larger home and then sell that and move up to a larger home, we've actually found that a lot of people are staying content in the homes they have, and they are simply remodeling and spending money, looking at that more as an investment. And I think that that's a healthy sign for Glendale. Our statistics have been a lot healthier and stronger than in some of our neighboring communities. Likewise, if you take a look at the very bottom of page 1, what you will find is that the total, and what this does is there are a lot of pass-through fees that we collect on behalf of other agencies in the Permit Services Center. Everything below subcolumn A are other ancillary fees that we collect. Some of those are for fees that we in the Permit Services Center provide, but then others are fees that we collect for other agencies. When you take a look at the total, what this does is this adds up all the revenues that we collect and subtract out of it everything that is not a fee that is dedicated for building and safety or permit services. And what you will find is that total there is $3,153,446. And that is very, very typical of what we see in the city of Glendale each year. So our revenues have been very good, and the good news is that the Permit Services Center, including all of the services that we provide, and I'll refer to Mr. Nichols here to my left, this includes fire prevention activities as well. They did not need to be subsidized by general fund monies. The revenues that we brought in were more than adequate to cover our costs. What I do want to do is turn your attention to the next page.
Mr. Tom, can I ask a question here while you're on this page?
Of course.
Just a curiosity, the GUSD developer fee was higher than last year, even though your total revenue was less. What was the reason behind that?
In part, it's because the Glendale Unified School District raised their fee.
Oh, okay.
That, by the way, is a pass-through fee. That's a fee that we collect on
I realize that, yes.
all conditioned space for residential and all space for commercial, but at different rates. Their fees did go up.
Okay.
But it's for a good cause.
I have one quick question.
Yes, Mr. Wu.
Now, has the city of Glendale raised any of the filing fees? I know that other municipalities close by has raised substantially, like their filing fees for plan check, building permits, zoning, I mean, what have you, pretty much across the board, but where are we at with Glendale?
Chairman Esson, Board Member Wu, we have not recently raised our fees other than very typical adjustments to keep pace with CPI. We, at some time, will reevaluate our fees, and in all likelihood, we probably will increase them to make sure that we can fully continue to cover the cost of our providing service. One of the things that's important to note is that the level of service that we provide here in Glendale is very, very extensive because we're so involved in so many different aspects of construction. And if, just as an example, during the inspection activities, our inspectors spend more time looking at something because here in Glendale we have, say, a design review process, and so therefore some things that might not be important to some communities, some of the aesthetic aspects of a project need to be looked at a little bit more closely when a building inspector is out there. It then means that he or she must spend more time doing what can be done more quickly in other communities. If that means that it costs us more to provide certain services, that has to be reflected in our fees. In all likelihood, as we as a city continue to improve the level of service so that we can protect our neighborhoods and our communities, it is very, very likely that we will need to adjust our fees. But that's only appropriate if it costs more money to provide the service, to see to it that things are constructed properly, safely, and in a manner that protects our neighborhoods, then additional fees should be borne by the applicant.
Definitely.
When was the last time a major fee change was accomplished in the city?
Our last fee resolution is dated 2008, and I believe that was rather early in 2008. So considering the fact that we probably will not even look at our fees again until 2010 for a host of reasons, it'll probably be right around 2 years since the last time the fee resolution was adjusted. Are there any other questions on page 1?
No, go ahead, sir.
Very good. If I draw your attention to page number 2, about the only thing that I really want to do is refer you to the very bottom of the report, because the rest of it, which is the building activity report, is fairly reflective of what I just described. But if you take a look at the very bottom of the report, what it does is it has a section referred to as customer count. And I think what is very important is if you take a look at previous year to date, that's actually the very, very last number on the report, you'll see that our last fiscal year, which once again was very, very busy because the economy had not hit us as hard as it has hit us this year, we helped 21,271 walk-in customers. Those are just the walk-ins. This doesn't even tally our regular appointments for meetings with architects and engineers and contractors for our submitted plans. These are just our walk-in customers, but it is very, very indicative of the workload that we have. This year to date, very, very close, 20,149. So what it goes to show you is that indeed, while in some sectors of the economy things have come to a grinding halt, in fact, if you were to have taken a look at some of the headlines in today's news press, real estate sales, as an example, have really, really taken a hit in all local communities, including Glendale. While that may be true in some areas due to the economy, construction itself has not come to a dead stop because people are merely changing the way they choose to invest in their homes. And of course, residential development is the most prevalent type of development that we have in the city. And with that, that's all relatively good news. We'll have to see where next year ends up. But I did want to share with you the monthly report that closed out the fiscal year. And with that, if there are any final questions, I'd be happy to address them.
Any other question? Well, at this point, I'd like to really thank Mr. Tom for this really comprehensive report on this parking project. It was quite educational to me, and also it was prepared in a manner where I personally could follow it, and I'd like to thank you on behalf of myself and the board for making this presentation.
Very good. And with that, since we're in the report section, I would like to turn it over to Mr. Nichols, who I believe would like to share a little bit of fire information.
Thank you, Mr. Tom. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, just a few items as an oral report. I don't have anything written to share, but I did want to note we have a monthly newsletter that comes out. The fire chief prepares, Glendale Fire and Rescue News. It is available on our website. However, if you are interested, it goes out to a wide variety of folks via email from the chief, and if you folks would like to receive that in your very own email inboxes, we'd be happy to send that along. Just let Ms. Luna know if you're interested. Make sure she has your email addresses, and we'll make sure we pass that along. But as I mentioned, it is always available in PDF format on our website, but you can get advance notice of that on your email. There are a few things I wanted to share from that, but also I just wanted to point out that I don't know Mr. Tom would say this himself, but we were very fortunate to have him receive a very special award last month that I don't know if you folks were aware of.
No, we were not.
But he was designated as Building Official of the Year by the California Fire Chiefs Association, specifically the Fire Prevention Officers section. They had a very nice presentation at the City Council meeting, June 23rd. But I think it just goes to, again, further testament to Mr. Tom's expertise, but also how he works well with the fire service in its larger scale rather than just here at home. So we want to make sure that you folks were aware of his recognition with that. And a couple other things just to also note. Our Fire Marshal, Dave Woods, retired July 2nd. So we're waiting for the next Fire Marshal to be appointed, although we haven't heard it yet. But in the meantime, business conducted as usual, and we have a good group, and we're doing just fine with that. And kind of tacking on to some of the statistics that Mr. Tom was sharing, I was reviewing some of our own activity and found that we also track some of our over-the-counter activity, the numbers of customers that we have, and which we have some notice that it has kind of tailed off a bit, but stabilized over the last 2 quarters. But our submitted plan reviews, we actually reviewed 10% more plans than we did this time last year. Again, I would concur that it's smaller projects, not quite as extensive, but the numbers have not subsided at all. We are still keeping very busy with that. So still plenty of things happening with that. Also just want to mention a couple of major projects that we've been able to still make some headway on. We have a DreamWorks project at 920 Flower Street, which is one of our major projects currently underway. I believe they've completed the parking structure up there, but still have a 7-story addition that they're working on, and a 5-story building that they're putting in. They're calling it an annex over there, so keeping us quite busy with some of the activity over there. And also the 207 Good project, which we were talking about earlier. Our inspectors just were able to complete the Fire Prevention Bureau final inspection on that. So I guess with your actions here today, Mr. Tom will be able to issue the certificate of occupancy and make that a fully functional, officially building. So it'll be good to see that. And also at the Americana at Brand, we had some discussions about that earlier. Finally completing some of our final inspections, because they have been operating under temporary certificate of occupancy, not only some of the core and shell structures over there, but some of the tenant improvements. So finally completing some of those. Probably by the end of this month, everything will be with the actual final certificate of occupancy, and Mr. Tom will be issuing those, I'm sure. And I also want to, Mr. Tertullian, follow up on one of your questions. You're asking about the activity level that Americana at Brand had. Now, as far as dollars and cents and permits, I don't have that readily available, but I do remember in reviewing some of our statistics that February, March, and April last year was like a feeding frenzy for permits and activity around here, where we were having all the tenant improvements, everyone anxiously awaiting that May 1st grand opening. And it was practically a zoo in our office with things coming and going. So I know that was the peak activity level, just looking at the number of customers we had over the counter. Now I know they probably had applied for permits before that and probably had paid fees before that, but everyone was hitting us at the same time, and it didn't matter if it was building permits, mechanical, plumbing, fire protection systems, everything was coming all at the same time. So there was a peak at that springtime last year, and see that reflected in some of our figures. And it certainly has dropped off since then, so it's kind of hard to compare March 2009 with March 2008, when we had such a major project in town, which is really not indicative of our average year by any sense of the word, but it does indicate that we still are doing quite a lot of business in town, keeping very busy. It's just at a different scale. And I think with, unless there are other questions, we, again, keeping quite busy, working well together, and looking for another productive year. And thank you for your time here.
I do have one quick question. With the recent wildfires and what's been shown on the news, what is Glendale Fire Department doing just to make sure that we don't have any of those wildfires starting here? I mean, God forbid, but...
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Wu, we actually did have a very small brush fire in Brand Park last month at, I think, less than an acre. We were fortunate to get there rather quickly, had enough apparatus and personnel on staff to keep it from getting any larger than that. But one thing we do, and in fact I can give you a few numbers, we do annual inspections of every parcel in the high fire hazard area. And our engine companies and truck companies perform those inspections. We have about 5,000 properties, which are all single-family dwellings. And that, and aside from about 100 city open space parcels, which are about 5,000 acres in total. And we inspect each and every one of those every year. And of those 5,000 properties, as of June 23rd, we had inspected 70% of those. And of those 70%, 86% were in compliance with our fire regulations. So we only issued violation notices to about 14%. Our target is to get through those first initial inspections by July 1st of every year, with Independence Day celebrations always being kind of our little warning. We try to get everything done at that time. So we're on target for that, getting everything completed. I think we're well on our way. We also send out press releases. We send out notifications to everyone. I believe I passed along some information for that last meeting where we distribute that. We also have press releases. So we do get a lot of information out, and it doesn't take but a couple of fires. I know we had some even last week up in the Castaic area, up and through there. It just kind of heightens everybody. So it by itself, it brings it to everyone's forefront, and they remember. But because of our hands-on activity, and we do those inspections on an annual basis, we do have a good rapport with our neighborhood. And it's not a matter of what to or when to do, it's just what to do. And so we give them that information, and it works quite well.
Thank you, Mr. Nichol.
Thank you.
And with that,
With that, all we need is a motion and a
motion
second to adjourn.
Yeah. Will somebody entertain a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Would you second that?
I second that.
The meeting is adjourned.